The water, energy, food nexus has received a lot of attention lately. So what is the nexus? What are the drivers behind the nexus platform and solutions? What are the elements of the nexus? And what is the governing principle that govern the nexus? We're going to start with population growth as an external or as a major external stress on the primary resources. With population approaching 10 billion in the 2050, with the highest growth in Asia and Africa. With most of this population will be living in big cities, requiring different needs for water, energy, and food securities. Water stresses are expected to grow, with the highest region being the Middle East, North Africa, Asia, and Central America. Energy Architecture Performance Index has rated these same regions of the world poorly as their ability to deliver energy security and provide access to energy for their people. If we look at the climate change and its impact on these primary resources, I'd like to focus our attention on two major securities, water and food. And if you look at the subtropics regions of the world that are experiencing the highest population growth and the highest stresses on the primary resources, these regions would receive lower rainfall that will make the availability for surface water and stored moisture much lower. That impacts the availability of water for the utilities and supply for fresh water as well as food security, knowing that the majority of the food we eat is produced under dryland farming. Besides scarcity, resource interconnectedness constitute additional stress to these primary resources, with 55% of the utilities operating budget is on energy cost. 80 to 90% of the fresh water supply goes into consumptive water use for food production. Beside physical risks, there is a changing global shift in how society look at risks and security, with water, energy, food security topping the chart in terms of their impact and likelihood. Even though that the geopolitical and technological risks are still there, they've been overshadowed by economic, environmental, and environmental risks. Therefore, a holistic approach is needed to manage and understand the interconnectedness of these primary resources, where that platform is a holistic and allows for mapping and accounting for these primary resources interconnectedness. As far as the history, I will start with Bonn in 2011, where the birth of the Nexus as we know it today and the publication that the World Economic Forum put in that same year on water scarcity, where they put together the framework defining the conceptual Nexus. Another benchmark in the Nexus history is Rio Plus 20, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, passing through some of the major shifts where the geopolitical think tanks are looking at water, energy, security as one of the major threats beside bridging religious divide and nuclear non-proliferation. The last stop I'd like to focus on is the revisit of the first Bonn meeting in 2014, where the sustainability and the water, energy, food nexus came back together. That committee came back together to chart the way for the future. And there are many other benchmarks that we have seen lately, including what's happening here today. The Nexus did not start and will not start from scratch. It will build on the systems theory as far as the data analytics and the framework for solving these complex systems. So what are the elements of the Nexus? I would start with quantification of the interlinkages. It's not enough to look into the conceptual framework, but we need to look at the quantification of the portfolio of water, energy, food. We look at the multi-scale effect of these Nexus systems or nexi, looking at this from a local perspective, regional and national perspective. We need to be inclusive in the Nexus debate and Nexus discussion to include all sectors of society. So the inclusiveness is both horizontal and vertical. The horizontal inclusiveness include all stakeholders from the governance of the water, energy, food to other sectors of society, including the private sector, civil society, and technology provider. We need to be holistic, integrative, and we need to look at evidence-based approaches for understanding and for managing these resources. The Nexus will not and should not replace disciplinary strength. It builds on this disciplinary strength by allowing this interconnectedness among them. It can only be successful if built on a very strong disciplines of water, energy, and food. It's not supposed to replace them, but rather built on the interconnectedness of these pillars. The Nexus complements the disciplinary conservation and efficiency effort and builds upon the integrating these concepts of water productivity, energy efficiency, and integrated water resources management. These concepts will allow us to make sure that we're not infringing in one resource by optimizing the other. How do we move from concept to analytics and build the analytical framework to identify, quantify the interlinkages, define hotspots, and assess in a very much quantitative way the trade-off. There isn't much resources flow to do everything we need to do. So we need to have a platform that allows us to do the trade-offs. Last but not least is how do we move from science to policy? If we focus on the analytics only, we will be halfway done in terms of the Nexus and its ability to induce change, whether this change in the policy or whether it's in technology or whether it's consumer behavior. We need to use the Nexus analytics as a platform for a dialogue that happens between two very important circles, the political economy and the supply chain, to move society from a conflict into cooperation, to allow us to better utilize these primary resources for a more sustainable world. Thank you.